I never really gave HLG the time of day before, but as you can see from these shots, it looks absolutely amazing. There's been no color grading here, at most a little contrast and saturation adjustment. I figured that HLG was for creating over-processed sunset shots, but I was completely wrong, and the best bit, it's easier to use, faster to use, and often gives better results than D-Log or D-Log-M. Stewart here. It's a pleasure to see you today, and I'm quite excited because I've done a whole bunch of tests here on the color profiles, learnt a few things that I want to share with you. If you have one of these three drones sitting on the table here or a DJI Pocket 3, you have access to two 10-bit color profiles, D-Log-M and HLG Hybrid Log Gamma. Assuming you want to get the most out of your cameras, the conventional wisdom is to shoot in the flattest color profile. This retains the detail and the highlights and the shadows, so when you then grade it in post and stretch it all back out, you get a nice roll off from those highlights into midtones and shadows, and it all looks quite nice. The approach is completely sound and it's absolutely a right thing to do. The only issue is that you require a little bit of expertise to correct that footage in post. Now this can range from being fairly straightforward if you've got a nice balanced exposure with the sun behind the camera, to fairly complicated if you have a very high dynamic range situation where you've got a sun in the sky and your ground is quite silhouetted. What if there was a color profile that not only gave you better results in high dynamic range situations, but also required little or no color grading? I think that's worth exploring. Well, this is where Hybrid Log Gamma HLG comes in, and I've been doing the tests and the results are very impressive. Here's an ungraded HLG clip from a high dynamic range scenario. We're pointing the camera right at the sun. That normally results in a kind of silhouetted landscape. It can give us a bit of a headache in terms of how to expose at the time of capture. Now, to my eye, that looks quite nice. Yes, we've got that blown out section in the sky, but the detail in the landscape is quite nice. Most of it's in the midtones, not too much shadow there. Identical D-Log-M shot. Now, before we meddle with anything, look at the highlight section of the waveform. Although both waveforms are showing a clipped section in the highlights where there's no color information whatsoever, the HLG profile is already showing a smoother, more gradual roll-off from those highlights into the midtones. If we compare that with the 8-bit normal image that we took of exactly the same shot, you can see the more typical silhouette-y type result that comes when you're pointing the camera straight at the sun. It doesn't look bad, but I personally really like what's straight out the camera from the HLG. We can't say yet that HLG has more dynamic range as such, but what we can see loud and clear is that almost all the work has been done for us in terms of contrast and saturation, resulting in a much more pleasing overall image. Mindful that color correction normally deteriorates an image's quality, especially if we're raising the exposure of the shadows and midtones. If the baseline we have is good, then we have even more latitude to work with that image in post. To see if HLG actually brings us genuine dynamic range benefits versus the D-Log-M, we need to color correct the D-Log-M footage to have a like-for-like comparison. That took a bit of trial and error, but I think I've got the D-Log-M shot very similar to the HLG. In fact, I'm going to have to add back even more saturation to make that comparable. Wow, two observations. The D-Log profile is incredible. With this 10-bit color depth, you can push the colors like there's no tomorrow without destroying the image. Let's do a quick shadows check by zooming in significantly and see if there's enormous amounts of noise dancing around in the shadows from all that. Well, there is some, but it's certainly quite acceptable, and only because we're zoomed all the way in. Let's compare that with the same HLG shot. Yeah, okay, there's noise in the shadows as well in the HLG shot, so that's just a stunning performance from D-Log-M, it really is. In terms of whether HLG has more dynamic range than D-Log-M, when we look at the blown out section of the sky, the amount of clipping is basically the same. We've already seen that the shadows also gave a similar performance. However, look at the midtones. It might not be super obvious watching this on YouTube because of YouTube's compression, but we have lost a ton of detail in the D-Log-M clip in the midtones. The amount of color correction required to match the HLG clip has really just been a bit too much for D-Log-M. In my opinion, at least, it's a clear victory for HLG. DJI provides D-Log-M to Rec 709 color correction LUTs for their drones. So in the instance of the Mini 4 Pro, let's add that color correction LUT to this D-Log footage. What we have there is a very simple combined contrast and saturation adjustment. The footage looks more normal, if you like, but it doesn't exactly look good. And if you look closely at the waveform, before, after, the highlight section bumped up as well, which is kind of the opposite of what we were trying to do in this high dynamic range shot. When we're talking about LUTs, we need to make a distinction between color correction and color grading. I like the color grading LUTs. They put a wash of blue into your shadows, whatever it is, just to make the footage look cool and trendy. Okay, that's color grading. Fine, enjoy that. But at the color correction side, you can see that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. You need to learn to do this stuff yourself. With HLG, you might choose to make some minor contrast and saturation adjustments, but straight out the camera, it looks amazing. Even if you're a bit more experienced, like myself, why make work for yourself? You saw the effort I had to go into there with the curves adjustment to sort out the D-Log-M clip. I've not got time for that. It's worth pointing out that wonderful as these color profiles are, they're no substitute for learning how to actually create nice footage at the time of capture. You need to know the impact the sun has on your shots, why a shot facing that way looks good and a shot facing that way doesn't look good. We teach you all of that here on the channel, but also with our premium content. Do check out the link in the description to our 9-hour drone cinematography masterclass. You may have heard me mention that before, and at the very least, download a copy of our free ebook From Drone Zero to Drone Hero, 37 tips to get you flying like a filmmaker. Is there any downside to using HLG? I couldn't find any. I did a lot of pixel peeping, especially in the shadows. It was not a more noisy color profile than D-Log-M. One strategy in high dynamic range situations is to underexpose at the time of capture with a view to boosting the shadows and midtones in post. You can do that with HLG should you wish. You're always going to introduce more noise into the shadows with any color profile if you do that, but I found the performance of D-Log-M and HLG to be similar. So let me know what you think, folks. Are you an HLG convert like I am? I can't believe it took me this long to really do a deep dive on that color profile, but I'm so glad I did. Check out the links in the description to all our cool stuff, and we will see you next time.